Good morning and welcome to the first day of this symposium. I would like to start by saying that we are extremely grateful to the members of the scientific committee for all their contributions, help and generosity. In the same way, we are grateful to all the authors that submitted an abstract and especially to those that will be here presenting their work. We also want to thank the e-learning services, and finally, we want to thank and welcome all the participants and wish you a fruitful symposium. And with no further delays, I will share my presentation.
The project Archaeology of Colour is about medieval Portuguese polychrome sculpture. However, we wanted this opening session and this symposium to be mostly focused on the importance and on the moments when we look beyond our research focus, when we crossed boundaries in the search of more informed answers regarding our own subject. As a contemporary phenomenon, and I see this every day here at university, typically scholars concentrate on their area of specialization. And in the specific case of material culture studies, by doing this, several opportunities are lost. One of which is, for example, the opportunity provided by the fact that the same raw materials and the same techniques were commonly used or adapted by several technologies, as well as the same motivations in specific contexts seem to have propelled those different technologies. Gypsum rock is an excellent example because we know that it is a raw material used by humankind since at least the Neolithic and was used in many different locations and by many different technologies. So, by investigating those different time periods, those different locales and technologies, a lot can be learned about gypsum used in our own context, the polychromy on sculpture. The main objective of the project, Archaeology of Colour, is to understand why the people involved within the production of polychrome sculpture decided to choose for the use of certain materials and certain techniques in order to form medieval sculptures. This project is not about materials and techniques per se, but it departs from their characterization. And the project originated from the almost absolute lack of knowledge in what respects to the polychromy of these sculptures, despite we know that these objects played a very important role in medieval Portuguese society. And this is attested by the enormous number of surviving objects, as well as its continuous use, demonstrated by the very frequent repolychromy of these objects. As an example, only the collection of the Museu Nacional de Arte Antiga holds around 840 medieval sculptures, and from this total, not a single one was entirely studied. In short, very little was known about the colors, the materials, or the techniques chosen to finish these sculptures, or about the people who carried out these decorations. This lack of knowledge about polychromies can be easily explained by the extreme difficulty of studying these surfaces. Here it is important to emphasize that in Portugal, unlike, for example, the case of illuminations in manuscripts, we do not have sculptures with the original decoration untouched or exposed. Either the original polychromy was completely removed, or what remains from it is obscured by later unsystematic and patchy repolychromies. As a consequence, in the cases where we still have remains of the original decoration, what we have today is usually a tortuous surface of mixed materials and layers, which needs to be patiently unraveled. The study object of this project are the wooden and the stone sculptures, the majority belonging to the Museu Nacional de Arte Antiga, and that are being selected in close collaboration with art historians. The reason why we decided to construct this first bridge, to study both wooden and stone sculptures, is because we believe that the comparative study of objects presumably with the same function and similar decoration, the polychromy, has the capability of providing important clues about our research questions. Here again, it is important to mention that Portuguese medieval sculpture collections are mostly constituted by stone pieces. And interestingly, for the 13th century, there exists only a small number of wooden sculptures, whereas for the 14th and 15th centuries, the vast majority are stone sculptures. One of the consequences is that it made it possible to attribute groups of stone sculptures to some possible workshops, which does not happen in the case of wooden pieces. In order to study and to understand these complex objects, we necessarily work in close collaboration with different researchers and disciplines. And we apply a methodology which is very commonly used in archaeological material culture studies that departs from three sources of information, seeking for complementary data. So far, we selected around 50 sculptures, which include groups of sculptures attributed to known workshops and others that have no attribution, but that, in the opinion of art historians, they are clearly from the medieval period, and these sculptures also work as blind samples. After this selection, the surface of each sculpture is carefully examined and documented in order to understand the different paint events, to check for the viability of each sculpture, and to choose the relevant places from which we remove microsamples. Those microsamples we later characterize with different analytical techniques, identifying materials and practices used for the original polychromies. More than the characterization of these aspects, we are also analyzing these samples, aiming at establishing dates, provenances, and production process of some of those materials. For each sculpture, all this information is gathered and compared, resulting in the production of individual reports. Subsequently, this organized data from the several sculptures attributed to the same workshop is compared, looking for patterns and singularities within each workshop. Next, between sculptures from the different workshops and with sculptures with no attribution. This continuous comparative process not only facilitates the interpretation of the results, but we find it essential in order to achieve more reliable results. The second source of information is the study of historical documentation, and here again, we do not concentrate only on documents strictly related to polychromies, such as painting treatises, but we also study various types of documents, which include treatises from different crafts and technologies, such as agriculture, mining, construction, geography, pharmacy, glass production, etc. But we also consult dictionaries, professional ordinances, law dispositions, commercial and trade documents, among others. And recently, we expanded this research to Arabic documentation, which will be discussed in a presentation tomorrow. These documents frequently provide information about the materials and techniques, their circulation and uses, also important information about agents involved in the production of these pieces, as well as on their motivations and concerns. The data retrieved from the documents undergoes the same comparative process and is also gathered in reports. The third source of information are the historical and archaeological reconstructions, where, based on the information retrieved from documents and physico-chemical analysis, we attempt to replicate materials, practices, and production processes used on these polychromies, in order to understand, for example, the working qualities of the materials or the practical viability of their production and application, which are aspects that are crucial for understanding technological choices. After establishing what was used for the decoration of Portuguese sculptures, we embark on constructing more challenging bridges for crossing different boundaries in the search for parallels and variations, which could add relevant information and provide robustness to our results, and to help us to contextualize our sculptures. Here I mean cross chronological and geographic boundaries, shading for the use of the same materials and the same techniques in different geographies and in different time periods. And to be able to do this, we are undertaking a literature review on published technical studies about polychrome surfaces since prehistory up to the 16th century. As well as we establish collaboration with other research groups studying sculptures, such as this project we have with colleagues from Norway. But chiefly, we are also looking at neighboring technologies. And for this, we maintain close contact with different groups and projects which are focused on different technologies. Now, in terms of results that we achieved so far, and I must say that I will concentrate and highlight some findings from which we can grasp possible singularities and also on findings that could show the continuity or the end of traditions. Regarding the first component of the polychromies, the preparation layers, it is possible to say that in terms of practices and materials, the wooden sculptures show less variation. Although not as standardized as we see in later centuries, the wooden sculptures studied so far always present a preparation layer. Moreover, these preparation layers are traditionally white and make use of what is expected for a southern European region, gypsum as the raw material. But of great interest for us is to understand that this same technique, the use of preparation layers, and the same material, gypsum, is used at least since the Neolithic. And also that during and from the ancient Egypt period onwards, we consistently find this same technique, but also the same materials, calcium sulfate and calcium carbonate, which is what we see on wooden European sculptures up to the 19th century. The holistic attention given to this technique also allowed us to attest, for example, that the main objective of the use of preparation layers on wood is the durability of the decorations. In what respects to the preparation layers on the stone sculptures, we do not find the same consistency. Some stone sculptures present a preparation layer, but others no. However, what was remarkable to observe is that in these Portuguese medieval sculptures, when they present a preparation layer, these are always colored, using warm colors, brown, reddish to yellowish. So far, we did not find white preparation layers in Portugal, which curiously the literature review on technical studies tell us that are typical on other European stone sculptures. The use of colored preparation layers, we think that clearly imply an intention, or maybe it is a tradition, as we know that these layers, although hidden, impact on the tone of the final color. This is an issue that is worthwhile to explore, and for which we still do not have clear answers. We find some other examples of colored preparation layers in other chronologies and geographies, but so far they did not help us to go any further. Although we do not know the working organization systems of these workshops, it was interesting to observe, when we compare the ground layers from the three workshops under study, that it is possible to grasp some singularities that could suggest the modus operandi of a particular workshop or of a certain period. In the case of Master Peru, we observed a certain tendency to produce double-layered crowns constituted by colored layer followed by a whitish layer, where we frequently find the pigment bone white. On the other hand, the ground layers of the sculptures attributed to João Afonso's workshop are always very thin, and the presence of the pigment Leptine yellow type 1 is very frequent. Finally, the workshop of Diogo Pires Velho, or the workshop producing those sculptures, also made use of a double-layered ground. In what respects to the color layers of wooden and stone sculptures, it is observed the use of similar materials and techniques of application that are reported for other European sculptures. However, a noteworthy singularity in Portuguese polychromies is the use of indigo as the main blue pigment, both in wood and stone supports, and consistently from the 13th to the 15th century. From the literature review, we know that 3 blue pigments were available and common during this period: lapis lazuli, azurite, and indigo. Again, this preference for indigo does not follow what it is considered the European traditional palette, which preferentially made use of lapis lazuli and azurite. Certainly, we do need more studies, but this could reveal an Iberian tendency or tradition, as indigo is also referred as a common pigment in medieval sculptures produced in the actual Spanish territory. Also of great interest for us is to understand that there are some practices and some materials found in medieval Portuguese and European sculptures that have an extremely long tradition, which use is maintained during the medieval and later periods, and that were also practiced in regions far beyond European boundaries. One example is the practice of using a dark layer, usually black or gray, under the blue pigment, presumably to enhance the blue color. This is a common practice in Europe during the Middle Ages, but that was already in use in much earlier chronologies and in places such as Egypt, Macedonia, Etruria, north of India, and Afghanistan. Or the use of a mixture of yellow orpiment with blue indigo in order to produce the color green, something that is common in Europe during the 12th century, which we only find later in Portugal on the 14th and 15th centuries, but that is reported to be in use since the 5th century in Central Asia. In what respects to color schemes, it is possible to affirm that the colors we see today for the majority of the sculptures is different from the original. And here are 3 examples. Because it was important for the discussion of the results to have an idea of how some of these pieces could have looked like originally, our colleague Sarah painted these drawings, which we thought interesting to show to you. And because we were considerably surprised by all of these results, we decided to radiocarbon date these polychromies, as we wanted to be sure that we were actually studying medieval polychromies, which was confirmed. Also, what surprised us and caught our attention was that one of the workshops, the workshop of Master Pero, has several sculptures decorated with a similar color scheme, showing a white mantle adorned with gilded borders over a blue dress. It would be of great interest to understand whose decision, whose choice was that. The master, the commissioner, is that a consequence of a tradition or an innovation, or a consequence of a specific worship? But to answer these questions, we definitely need more data. I would like to conclude by pointing out that this is an ongoing project, and a lot more data is necessary to gather in order to confirm or to readjust these preliminary findings. Nevertheless, we are very excited with the results achieved so far, and especially with this transdisciplinary approach. And this is why we wanted a symposium where people from different fields and focused on different technologies, geographies, and chronologies would gather and inspire us to rethink and rediscuss Portuguese medieval polychromies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, and sorry for these problems with the sound. If you have any questions, I'm not sure if we have time for that, but okay. So I think we could start with the first panel. So now I welcome the first panel, and I will leave the room to Ian, our first moderator. Sorry, Ian, but I do not dare to pronounce your surname.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Because I cannot see myself, but that's not a problem. We are well. My first can I be sure this is I'm a Neanderthaler in the matter of digital Zoom meetings. It's the first experience as a moderator, so I can only hope that the 87 participants for this meeting, very impressive, can also hear me and see me. Do you know? Can you tell me whether I'm on? Okay.
Yes,
That's because I can only see you. Doesn't matter. You look good, so it's not a problem. But I want to thank you and your team first of all for the project, and I really very much applaud your approach in choosing to cross boundaries. And this methodology is well reflected in the choice of moderators for the first 3 sessions, because I will be joining my colleagues Paolo Liverani and Vincent Brinkman, all of them dealing with, in a very large sense, the polychromy of the Greco-Roman world. So I think this is a very, very fruitful approach. And I've been making notes from your, anyway, I shall leave that. But I applaud the project. Secondly, I have to excuse my Spanish, which is non-existent. When I introduce the papers of the first session, a session which has 2 papers, both of them dealing with architectural polychromy, one from the 5th century in Iron Age Iberia, and the other one with Asia Minor in the 4th century BCE. And both papers seem to me to be extremely promising. That is to say, they will have my interest at least. And finally, I shall add that as a moderator, my role will be primarily that of making sure that the 2 speakers or the presentations keep time, because we have 20 minutes for the papers and then subsequently a period for discussion of the papers, so that the papers will succeed one another, and then we'll have final 20 minutes of answers and questions, discussion. And I really request that the speakers coming up, the first 2 speakers, which are rather in the plural, but I mean that we keep time as ever really important. I think that I may then proceed to the first of the 2 papers in this session, which could have been given a session title, because we're dealing with architectural polychromy of the 5th and the 4th century BCE. So the first paper is presented by 2 of the 4 scholars involved. They are the scholars involved. Here comes my Spanish. Fernando Quesada Sanz, Jesus Robles Moreno, Enrique Paragrejo, and Maria Isabel Sanchez Marquez. And the 2 presenters will be Fernando and Jesus. And I can say that both of them, Fernando is a professor of archaeology at Madrid, and Jesus is at the moment assistant to the direction of the Coimbra del Barranco archaeological site. And I'm keeping these biographical introductions short, because you can look them up on the net It's sort of an old-fashioned style. You say, well, he wrote this and published that. But I shall refrain from that. And I shall please ask Fernando and Jesus to give their paper to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I will share my screen now. Let's see. Wait a minute. Okay, can you see my presentation?
No.
No?
No.
I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you
Now
and
it's
see you.
okay.
Okay, now you see me, you hear me, and you see my presentation, right?
Yes, not in presentation mode, but we see your.
Yeah,
Yes.
I will go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's it.
Yes.
Well, shall I start? Good morning. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you to the scientific committee for accepting our proposal, and congratulations for a very interesting Congress program. I must begin by apologizing my colleagues who have not been able to be here today for various work-related reasons, especially Professor Dr. Fernando Quesada Sanz, who may join us later, but has been finally unable to speak today. So, in recent years, ancient Mediterranean sculpture has regained its color. It is not that we have painted the sculpture by any means, but rather that research has continued to delve into a very fruitful topic, the polychromy of ancient statuary. Various testimonies where this polychromy is preserved, such as this example shown at the screen, warn us of something that is now known by almost everyone. Ancient Greco-Roman sculpture and architecture were not as white as the Renaissance vision has traditionally transmitted. They were vividly painted instead. The act of painting a sculpture didn't simply mean decorating it, but it was a very important and necessary step for its completion. A sculpture lacking polychromy lacked soul, and it was incomplete. Any sculpture to be exhibited in a public or private context had to be adequately painted, sometimes with a very high degree of complexity. As many recent works and exhibitions have shown, the ancient world was a world of colors, and pigments were essential in sculpture, so it could be as close to reality as possible. Due to the growing interest in this topic in recent years, there has also been an investigation into the use of colors in the sculpture of other Mediterranean regions. Such is the case of the Iberians, a culture that existed in the southern and eastern parts of the Iberian Peninsula from the 6th century before Christ to the 1st century of our era. Like many other Mediterranean peoples, the Iberians developed stone sculpture and architecture, and like many others, made prominent use of color on them. From the earliest findings, such as the Lady of Elche, various authors drew attention to the traces of color that remained on the surface of these sculptures, many of which are now lost, and proposed the first reconstruction. This is the case with the one shown on the screen by Pijuan, made in 1914, based on observations of the famous sculpture from Elche, the Dama de Elche. Later discoveries, such as the Lady or Dama of Baza or the Warrior of Baza, along with a series of fragments, left no doubt. Iberian sculpture was also polychrome. Pieces that in most cases we see today in the white or yellowish-white color of sandstone and limestones were painted with great intensity and with a varied color palette in which red, as we will see, plays a leading role. Naturally, research has also focused on this area. Among other works, in addition to Mielke's excellent synthesis, we want to highlight Professor Teresa Chapa's recent project, which is very focused on the study of polychromy in sculpture. Thanks to the use of photographical methods, notably the use of the D-Stretch software tool, Professor Teresa Chapa and her team are documenting the invisible, the color that existed on Iberian sculpture, providing us with a completely new perspective on it. For example, her work on the Lady of Baza stands out, in which, in addition to discovering that the sculpture features some characteristics that are not carved but literally painted instead, includes photographs that bring us closer to how this important sculpture looked in antiquity. Notice, for example, the detail of the eyelashes or the various shades of red used on the skin. Similarly, another remarkable work by Professor Teresa Chapa is on the Lion of Elche, where it has been discovered that the paint not only covered the surface of the piece, but also created this curious decoration in the shape of flames or stripes. And just like in the rest of the ancient world, not only sculpture, but also architecture, specifically architectural decoration, was painted. Also mentioned by other authors in catalogs and synthesis studies on Iberian architectural monuments, the decoration of these structures had not been addressed with as much depth as in the case of freestanding sculpture. However, in addition to some architectural pieces where polychromy is visible, in my doctoral thesis on Iberian architectural decoration, I have been able to document several new cases using photographical methods similar to those employed by Professor Teresa Chapa. However, the documentation of these cases has only served, for now, to draw attention to the need to delve deeper into numerous aspects of color applied to Iberian architectural decoration, such as the colors used, their patterns of arrangement, their meaning and composition, as well as the techniques used to apply polychromy. For this reason, today we present a significant case of study that also represents progress on an unpublished piece, a large block decorated with reliefs from El Cerro de la Merced, on which chromatic analysis have been carried out. It is an exceptional case of study to date and provides us with a first approach to the study of color and its meaning in Iberian architectural decoration. El Cerro de la Merced is an archaeological site located 4 kilometers southeast of the town of Cabra, Córdoba. Although evidence of this site occupation dates back to Neolithic period, the majority of archaeological evidence corresponds to the Second Iron Age or the Iberian period. It is not an oppidum, but rather an architectural compound centered on a single massive building. Also traditionally interpreted as one of many fortified enclosures or recintos fortificados of Baetica, the excavations carried out by our team here since 2012 have allowed us to define it as an aristocratic complex. Although the site is still in the study and publication phase, it can be anticipated that during this Iberian period, two construction phases have been distinguished. The first phase, also called Building A, corresponds to the 5th century before Christ and the first half of the 4th century before Christ. Here we find a square, one-story building with a side length of 14 meters. It features a large paved courtyard and 3 rooms. This building was accompanied by a possible monument decorated with reliefs and Egyptian gore moldings. It is possible that in this phase it had a cultic function and perhaps it was a sanctuary. Around the mid-4th century before Christ, a second phase, or Building B, began with reforms to the building. In addition to changes in the inner structure, a strong perimeter wall, a second floor, and a series of monumental terraces to the south and north were added, as well as a monumental staircase. The side length of the building increased from 14 to 20 meters. In this wall of Building B, during 2015 fieldwork, a decorated block with reliefs was found here recycled. That is to say, when the building was renovated, the monument that was next to Building A was dismantled, and blocks like this one, or the quartz moldings, were used as construction material. In fact, in this case, to place them on the wall, the reliefs were intentionally chiseled, as shown by the broken pieces of the reliefs found during the excavation. It is a large block, measuring over 1 meter in length and weighing over 1 ton. On its front face, it is decorated with reliefs of high quality and complexity. These reliefs can be defined as phytomorphic due to their shape, as they consist of highly stylized vegetal motifs characteristics of the Iberian world, especially in Upper Andalusia. On the frontal decorated surface with a concave molding, intertwined vegetal ribbons can be seen, which do not follow any specific patterns. The prominent volutes in high relief stand out and they project outward. At the bottom of the piece, Ionic schema is observed, an oblong molding on which ionic egg and dart motifs have been carved. They are inverted from their usual position, as this is typical of the Iberian adaptation of this Mediterranean motif. Its dating, due to being recycled in the mentioned wall, must be before the mid-4th century before Christ. Based on typological and stylistic criteria, such as the presence of ionic egg and darts motifs, it is possible to tentatively place it in the 5th century before Christ. We are not certain about the exact type of building to which it belonged, although given its dimension and its possible relationship with the Egyptian gourd molding blocks found here, it might have been part of a tower-shaped monument. Among the numerous analyses being carried out on the piece, one of them is the study of color, as small traces of pigments can still be seen on the surface of the block. In collaboration with Artico, a company that has also conducted polychromy studies for the National Archaeological Museum of Spain, among other institutions, this study was carried out. For this purpose, 3 different pigment samples were taken. 2 of them, YAM1 and YAM2, which appear to be red in color, were taken from the interior of the volutes where the polychromy was preserved. Third sample, YAM3, was taken from the bottom part of the decorated surface and appeared to be white in color. For its analysis, 4 common techniques in the study of polychromy were employed: optical and electron microscopy, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, scanning electron microscopy, energy dispersive X-ray analysis, and gas phase chromatography. All of this, as described in the slide, help to determine the existence or absence of polychromy, the colors used, their application methods, and the components of the pigments. This makes it today the most detailed chromatic study conducted on an element of Iberian period architecture and practically one of the most complete chromatic studies of Iberian period sculpture. The first interesting result observed here is that the samples present a double preparation layer before the application of pigment. As can be seen in these photographs, where the limit between the layers is clearly visible, in all 3 samples a thick preparation layer is observed, serving to prepare the piece before the application of color. It is composed of an heterogeneous lime mortar with abundant limestone and smaller amounts of quartz and silicate minerals. It is characterized by a white brownish color. The second preparation layer is only documented in YAM2 and YAM3. It is brown in color, thin in thickness, and rich in calcite and ochre soil. The third outer layer will correspond to the pigmentation, which has different colors and compositions. Here we can see the composition table of the different samples. The components of the preparation layers mentioned before can be seen here in detail. It is noteworthy the absence of known organic binders beyond the fatty acids and metabolites that appear in all samples. However, the most interesting aspect is highlighted in yellow: the compositions and colors of the outer layers, the pigmentation layers. For example, in YAM1 and YAM2, this layer takes on ochre or redstone. It's very thin and well defined. Its main components are calcite and, above all, reddish and ochre colored soils. This is a way of pigmenting similar to other Iberian cases, such as the Dama or Lady of Elche, where these soils are mixed with gypsum and intensified with vermilion to enhance the mouth of the figure. In contrast, in YAM3, there is a layer of white color corresponding to a plaster rich in calcite with traces of gypsum. Indeed, observe in the photograph of the samples the difference in the appearance of these outer layers. YAM1 and YAM2 are reddish, thin, and well-defined, and in YAM3 it is white in color and the red layer does not appear. This data is very important not only because it shows the existence of 2 different colors on the same piece, but also because it is worth remembering that the samples came from different locations of the same block. YAM1 and YAM2, the ones with red color, both come from the ribbons near the volutes. YAM3, the white colored one, on the other hand, was taken from the bottom part, from the space between the bands and the lower molding. This suggests a proposal for color restoration. The relief carved elements, bands, and volutes are painted in red, while the background on which these motifs appear will be white. This may also apply to the egg and dart molding motif, on the bottom part, where no samples were taken, but it can be observed how the rims of some eggs seem to still have red pigments. Taking this into account, a casting of the block was made on which the colors of the block were applied. For this, we relied on the data derived from this analysis and on the hypotheses formulated from it. The relief carved elements were painted in red, while the background was painted in white. It is true that we do not know the exact shade of these colors, especially of red, and we do not know if other colors could have been applied to certain details of the piece. Nevertheless, we believe that this image of the block is closer to what it might have looked like in the Iberian period. It seems to be a relatively simple but quite impactful color combination. In this way, the ribbons will stand out even more on the surface. We must also consider that this is only one block of a larger building where perhaps other colors were applied, resulting in a composition with very rich polychromy like the ones we know from the ancient Mediterranean. It is worth noting that red is the most common color in Iberian architecture and sculpture. We have seen some cases before, and now others can be observed here, chosen randomly from several examples. This is by no means an aesthetic decision, or not only, and authors like Professor Juan Blanquez or Ramos Folquez have drawn attention to this and sought a symbolic explanation for the predominance of red color. Considering that many of the architectural pieces similar to the one discussed here are part of funerary or commemorative monuments, it would not be surprising to think that that red color has a special symbolism. Perhaps it is related to ritual or sacred context, to the world of deities and the afterlife. Future studies will allow further exploration on the matter of symbolism of colors in Iberian period. About those future studies, and to conclude, the case discussed here of El Cerro de la Merced has served to understand this piece and continue approaching to the knowledge of the possible monument that existed next to Building A. But above all, it has shown that, as is the case with Iberian sculpture and is the rest of the ancient world, monumental architecture and its decoration also include polychromy. Polychromy, when studied appropriately and thanks to technological and methodological advances, can provide much data which can be summarized in 4 points. The first one is the documentation of polychromy in Iberian architecture. There are many pieces where traces of color can be observed, but thanks to new technologies, such as the use of de-stretch software, we can begin to see the invisible and to document traces of pigments where they are no longer visible to the human eye. The second one is the reconstruction of the original appearance of the monuments. With procedures like the one applied here, we are closer to the image that these buildings had in their original lifetime. Although we are accustomed to see them stripe of all color in the usual yellowish and white tones of the limestone used, the case of El Cerro de la Merced reminds us of the complexity and chromatic richness that many of these pieces have. Another aspect is production. As we have said, in the ancient world, a sculpture or an architectural monument is not conceived as finished unless it is painted. Therefore, it is necessary to consider stuccoing and polychromying as a very important phase of the production process. Furthermore, it is necessary to delve into the analysis of pigments to understand how were they made and how were they applied. In this case, in addition to the pigments, we have been able to document a double preparation layer. And finally, the question of meaning. As mentioned at the end of this presentation, some colors may have a symbolism that is difficult to understand today. Perhaps this is the case of red color, which is repeated in numerous architectural elements and seems to be characteristic of sacred and funerary contexts. These are ultimately some pending tasks that need to be further explored to deepen in this area of research. An area barely explored yet in the Iberian world, but one that, in our opinion, offers interesting and new perspectives of study. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jesus. I hope that my audio is through to you all. This was a really interesting presentation. Congratulations.
Okay, so Ian, shall we go for the period of questions to Jesus, to the presentation of Jesus, and then we will see if the second author comes up.
Certainly, I'm with you on that. But you know that you call me Ian, but in fact it's Jan.
No,
No, but it's not important. But
I
just
was on
for
the
future
internet
use, it's not a
trying
problem.
to.
It's
I
not a
was
problem.
on Google Translate, but
No. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The question now is: I can see that on the chat there are some questions. As far as I can see, there are no raised hands at the moment, at least. And I must say that this is I'm being a Neanderthaler. I was born too early to be really into the black magic of the digital age. So will excuse me, please, if I go wrong. But on the chat, let's see what the questions are. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Are there any questions? These are all to do with whether the audio was okay. So if everybody out there can hear me, do you have any questions? And then please raise your hand.
yes, there are no questions on the chat.
Well, I have one. I have a question for Jesus. Not a question, but a comment rather. That this has to do. Sorry.
We have
Isabel?
a
Yeah.
question on the chat, so
Yeah.
I can read it.
Yeah,
So it's
please.
from Carolina Sopa. Thank you for your very interesting talk, Jesus.
Yeah.
What evidence is there so that we can be sure that it is the original polychromy and not one that was added later?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the interest and the question, and that's a good one, I must say. But Iberian sculpture and architecture, monumental architecture, has a very, very short life, which means that it is used and 20 or 25 or maybe 50 years later, it is broken and it's not recycled or reused, for example, as we can see in the Greek or Roman world. So it is not common, and I cannot think now of any cases where an Iberian architectural member, for example, was reused in a later monument. We can find it reused or recycled, but as constructive material. And this is the case with the one studied here. We believe that this is part of a monument that was standing next to the first phase of the building in the mid 5th century before Christ. But on the second phase on the building, it was recycled on a wall as simple constructive materials. That means that it has no longer a life as a monumental member, as a decorated piece, because in this second phase, the block, as I said before, was chiseled. The reliefs were broken in many parts, and the decorated surface was placed against the wall, so the reliefs could no longer be seen. And that's why we believe and we know that it is the original color of the piece. It belongs to the first and only phase where the decorated surface was visible. Thank
Well,
you.
I, for my part, find that very convincing. But Isabel, are there other questions that you have received? In that case, if I may, Jesus, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Which has to do with the whole range of interpretations of the colors on Greek or Roman or Iberian monuments, whether architectural or sculptural, namely the question of the possible symbolic value of the colors used. I mean, we are in, as you have also said, we are in a very, very early phase of documenting and finding the polychromy of the architecture of Iberian Iron Age monuments, so that we have so little data that it's really early days to begin interpreting. I just wanted to say that as far as the interpretation concerned with the symbolic value of colors, we have at least now, from a later period, mind you, very much later period, the study by Gab.Inovation on the Mithraic monuments in Pannonian Roman times in the colony, where you have 4 Mithraic monuments, absolutely the same iconography, but the polychromy is completely different. So the idea of symbolic color values on monuments is one that has to be counted a little bit, because it's so tempting on a Christian background to say, well, this color means this and that color means that. So color coding, as I understood, if I understand you right, it's one of the methods of interpretation. Does it symbolize or does it not? And it's just a comment, really.
Yeah, it is. But I must say that maybe there is not like a strict code in the Iberian War, or I don't believe it is. But I must say that, for example, in the Iberian War, we can find sometimes some tumuli, which are not monuments. It's just sand over a funerary chamber. And many of them are painted in red. The sand is painted in color red. So, and it's a funerary context related to aristocratic funerary monuments. But this case, it is not architecture. It is just sand, and it is painted in red. And it's a huge tumuli painted in red color. So maybe there is not a strict code like red means this, green means this, but maybe it's like an idea of ambience. No, this is red, this belongs to something special. No, it marks the sacred or the special characteristic of the monument or the place where this color can be applied. But it's just an idea. It's just, so we have to delve deeper into this meaning. But I do not believe that there are strict codes in Iberian world to define which color means one idea. I think it is more like a sense or ambience of that can be transmitted through color.
And accessibility of pigments.
Yeah.
But Isabel, what do we do now?
We have 2 questions in the chat.
Good, very good.
So the first one for Carmen Vida. Thank you for the presentation, Jesus. Really interesting project and approach. Congratulations. One thing I was curious about is if, when applying the different analytical techniques for pigments you presented, you had a preferred order for analysis.
Well, maybe I'm not the most indicated to speak on technical details, because this analysis was carried out by Maria Isabel and Enrique, my 2 colleagues from Artico. But I can say, and I believe that the order was first to know if the pigments or the colors we could see in the piece were original or not, because maybe it is not original pigments, it can be contamination or something like that. Sometimes it happens. And then when they were noticed and we can we could say that it was pigment and it was color, then we still carrying out the analysis that I have mentioned before, no, the compositions, the identification of preparation layers. So I think that there is not an order like that, but the first one was to know if the color that we could see was or not original. And some analyses are still being carried out right now at the moment for the piece.
So, and the other question is from Aida, and she asks, which were the results from the FTIR and gas chromatography concerning the binding medium? Was it possible to detect or conclude the origin of fatty acids? And thank you for your wonderful lecture.
I think that we are. I think so. The result is that we could know that as organic binders, we could find, as I said, acid metabolites and fatty acids. Well, about the origin, I think again I must say that Enrique and Maria Isabel are still thinking about it and investigating about it, but I think I cannot say if I know or not the origin now. I think we are about to know it, and they are trying to investigating. So maybe in the publication of this congress we can provide more details. But right now I can't remember if this was it was determined of not or not. I'm really sorry, but as I said before, some really technical details of this one, I cannot deal with them because I didn't do this analysis. But I will look it up and we will try to provide it on the acts of the Congress, or if not, maybe try to write me. I said my my email in the last slide, so try to write me and I will look it up and try to tell you, to give you an answer about it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Jesus. I was very interested because you found a double-layered ground system, and I'm very interested in the preparation layers. So it was very interesting. So I will wait for the publication to have more results and to study your
thank you very much.
So I think the second presenter is not present. No.
Too bad.
Yes, because I was very interested in that presentation as well. So I think.
But Isabel, if if the situation is that we have some time before the announced break.
Yes.
And if we are to conclude that really interesting paper on unraveling Asia Minor's polychrome architectural sculpture through the Alabanda anti-capital, which had my intense, I mean, just as a Jesus paper had my interest, that one really had my interest. So I must say I suppose I'm disappointed.
Me too.
So, but if that is the case, there is some time, and I was wondering what you and your colleagues on the team, whom I congratulate on getting this meeting, or rather getting the project started and having this meeting, whether you have ideas as to how, because having such extra time is unusual. How would you suggest that we, because there are a lot of participants, I can see that there are very many. So what might we,
I think we need to go for because we could not start with the next panel because we will, so with the moderator and the next panel will confuse everything.
Yeah.
So I think we should do a break.
Yeah.
And we will be back at the time that we
Will you then perhaps allow me just a brief comment?
Of course I do.
Because the fact that you have this and the second session crossing boundaries not only chronologically, but also as far as the categories of, let's say, artifacts are concerned. That is to say, that terracottas and stone, architecture and sculpture, freestanding, and all this, and the chronologies. I mean, this approach is one which I can only really applaud. And the comment that I now have is that in the Copenhagen Polychromy Network, a key partner was, of course, the School of Conservation, which has all the apparatus and the people to use it and so on. Well, this was 2009, 2008, but there is an aspect of art history and conservation, which is the art history of techniques. And the thing that made it interesting for the School of Conservation to work with us at the Clipsig was that they needed to learn, they needed to get an idea of what had been transmitted from, let's say, late Roman Byzantine times into later periods in Europe. And we, coming from, let's say, Greco-Roman antiquity, needed parallels from later periods that are much better preserved. So when I was looking at Jesus' results, we're dealing with aspects of polychromy that are recognizable from a Greco-Roman angle, but they're just much better preserved. So this, I just wanted to, this comment is about encouraging this kind of technical art historical study, that you try to bridge the gap from, let's say, early medieval, late Byzantine, Romanesque, back to late antiquity, by, for example, by studying Byzantine ivory reliefs and studying the architecture and the polychromy of the early churches and so on. So it's just, my main comment is simply to encourage the kind of approach that you have chosen, because
yes,
it can be a win-win.
Yes, we understood, or I understood from since my PhD, that it is very important, for example, to study stone and comparing polychromy on stone, polychromy on wood, polychromy on ivory, polychromy on wall painting, because it gives us a lot of ideas about the intention of the person that is applying the polychromy, because there are different needs, and you need to take into account those different needs. So you use materials in a different way, and that made us to understand a lot of things about the different materials that they were using. For example, the double ground. It is important for the durability. It is also important for the quality of the work. But we also see that there are some pieces where we clearly see that the painter is not worried about the very smooth, with a very smooth surface. He wants a rough surface. So it's by looking at different different technologies, different chronologies, and different geographies that we learned a lot about. It gives us an idea about what we about our research focus, and that's why we wanted this symposium to be very open. It was a risk, we know, but we were very interested in hearing different presentations and different approaches for us to think about our focus.
But it's such a beautiful project. Thank you very much for it. So I guess that now, unless somebody else out there wishes to join this.
No, the chat has no questions.
They've gone for coffee.
So the author is not in yet. No. So unfortunately, he is not here. So I think we could end this panel, and we will be back at 11. Do not forget Lisbon time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you. Hello again. We just heard, unfortunately, we just heard that Paris Jenner had a health problem, so he could not be here. So now I welcome the second panel, and I want to welcome Paolo Liverani, that is going to be the moderator of the second panel. So the room is yours, Paolo. Good morning.
Thank you. Okay. And now we begin with our second panel, and I am happy of the invitation to be the chair of this session. And I introduce the first speaker, Donata Maglini, who is a renowned researcher of the National Council of Research of Italy, the Institute for Heritage Studies, and Claudia Noferi of the Soprintendenza ai Musei della Toscana. They will speak about a couple of cinerary urns of the Etruscan period. And please, I don't know whether you speak both or only Donata.
No, just me, just me.
No, only Donata.
Yes.
Please, Donata.
You hear me?
Good morning, everybody.
You hear me? I'm
Yes,
here.
too.
Yes, okay. So I can start, I can share my screen. Yes?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
please.
You see it?
Not yet.
It's okay now?
No, 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 no,
Not yet.
no.
On
Zoom,
yes.
bottom, you have share
Yes.
screen. Then you click on share screen. Then you go
Yes.
to your presentation. Now it's yes.
Now, yes. Oh,
Yes.
okay.
So you only need to put it in presentation mode. Yes, done.
It's okay now?
It's
Okay.
perfect.
Sorry, I remove. Okay. So thanks a lot for this introduction. And I would like to thank all the organizers for the opportunity to present the research on the original polychromy of Etruscan alabaster artifact in collaboration with the Museum of Santa Maria della Scala in Siena and the Direzione Regionale dei Musei in Tuscany. As you know, it's now an established fact that ancient statuary and architectural elements were polychrome. We had already a presentation in the previous panel dealing with this topic, so I will not go further in detail on this. I just want to point out on how today the archaeological research has highlighted the importance of original color to understand ancient sculpture in its many aspects. And at the same time, the development of archaeometric protocols, which are based on the use of reliable, portable, and non-invasive analytical methods, has made it possible to scientifically support these studies. Today, we will present you an archaeometric study carried out on two on the polychromy of 2 Etruscan alabaster urns from the Hellenistic period, fortunately in an excellent state of conservation and characterized by a rich polychrome decoration that is still visible and well preserved. So in this case, we are definitely very lucky because our research was strongly aided by the richness of this polychromy that is still present, while very often we are faced with artworks appearing almost totally white and with just a few and almost invisible residual of the original polychromy. Moving to the case studies of this speech, the class of the Etruscan urns is one of the most common funerary monuments in the north of Etruria in the Hellenistic period. So from the late of the 4th century to the 1st century before Christ. These objects, designed for the conservation of the remains of the deceased, were placed inside chambered structures, usually underground, and furnished the tombs of aristocratic families and were used from generation to generation, even for several centuries. The inscription, sometimes engraved on the lid or on the case, indicated the name of the body of the deceased, and in some cases, a few brief details about his or her life. The main areas of circulation and production of these artifacts are made in alabaster, limestone, tuff, travertine, and later in terracotta are concentrated around the center of Volterra, Perugia, and Chiusi. And the 2 alabaster urns we present today come from this last area, Chiusi, and belong to the tomb of Sentinate Cumere in Sarteano, discovered in 1835 and then included into a Bargagli collection, which is a collection named in honor of the family that owned the land where they were excavated and found. In 1918, the collection was bequeathed to the Archaeological Museum of Florence by Pietro Bargagli, and then in 1930 it was transferred to Siena for the creation of the Archaeological Museum in Via della Sapienza, and then it was moved inside the ancient Santa Maria della Scala Hospital, where the urns are today still preserved. The documents at the time of the discovery and subsequent reports tell that almost 14 urns were recovered on the tomb of the Sentinate Cumere, and almost all of them were inscribed and had some evident traces of colors on the surfaces. The first urn is the 730, is dated around 240-220 and belonged to Hank Sentinate Cumere, which is depicted on the lid in the position of the fasting, while on the case are depicted Iphigenia, Oreste, and Pylades in Tauris, the scene about Iphigenia, Orestes, and Pylades. Here some images, some details of the characters and of the residual polychromy. On the lid of the second urn, the 731, which is made in alabaster as well, but is slightly later, is 220-100 BC. L'Art Cumere is depicted in the same position as the previous one, and the case is decorated with a lively and colorful battle scene, emphasized by the presence of dying warriors and gods of the afterlife. Here again, some examples, some images. So the artworks were examined using a well-established analytical protocols with a completely non-invasive and portable instrumentation. These two aspects are fundamental in the investigation of polychromy, of color traces in particular, which are often rare and very tiny. For this reason, it's preferred to use methods that don't require any sampling, leaving the traces on the surface intact. The scientific protocol that we applied is based on a preliminary documentation of the artworks through observation and acquisition of images at high magnification. And then multiband imaging technique are then used to detect the presence on the surface of paint materials with characteristic emission in the spectral ranges of interest. This is of fundamental importance, especially in the case of residual polychromy, since it allows to detect the traces on the surface that cannot be revealed at the naked eye. On the basis of the results of the multiband photographic investigation, analyses were carried out using point technique in order to obtain information on the organic and inorganic substances which are present. So X-ray fluorescence and reflectance spectroscopy were then applied to reconstruct the paint palette. Okay. Moving to some results of this study and this research, the acquisition of the ultraviolet induced luminescence preliminary revealed the presence of dripping on the case, which can be mainly attributed to the use of a protective material, probably synthetic. On the lid, there's also the evidence of areas which are affected by the presence of surface treatments and the conservative intervention with adhesives. While there's no evidence on the lid of pigments with any characteristic fluorescence emission. On contrary, the UVL images made it possible to detect the presence of on the case of an organic red pigment, colorant, sorry, even where it was not visible to the naked eye. In this slide, I show you a detail of the captured images, and with the arrow, the yellow arrow, you can observe the pinkish emission that is associated with the red organic colorant. Highly magnified images made it possible to better observe the state of conservation of the paint layer and to document traces of the original polychromy revealed previously revealed by the use of photographic technique. A white preparation, a white ground layer is also visible below the paint. According to the results of reflectance spectroscopy, the dyes used has an anthraquinonic structure that can be detected as they show an absorption band structure into subband in the 500-580 nanometer, so which is typical of dyes of vegetal origin, such as like a madder lake. On the URN 730, visible induced luminescence analysis, which are used to detect the use of Egyptian blue, revealed extensive use of these pigments, which is visible to the naked eyes in several areas, but highlighted in some details of the scene where it had not been observed during the preliminary examination, such as, for example, in some decoration of the garment, or on the hips of the swords, or the horse's bridle. Again, high magnification images document the extent of surviving traces and support the selection of points for spot non-invasive analysis. The reflectance spectra register the presence of the absorption band, which are characteristic of Egyptian blue, while X-ray fluorescence detect the presence of copper in the spectra, further confirming the identification and the composition of the pigments used to make the blue paint. The trace of yellow polychromy are due mainly to the use of iron-based yellow ochre. This indication comes from the processing, again, of X-ray fluorescence and reflectance spectroscopy, which register the spectral characteristic due to these pigments. Moving to the other 731 urns, here the polychromy is clearly richer and better preserved. Ultraviolet imaging has made it possible to document and highlight the presence of protective coatings, probably wax, with a yellowish emission, clearly visible on the faces, but mostly was useful to highlight the abundant use of the red lake. Again, this dye has been identified as a vegetable dye, possibly madder. Visible induced luminescence again revealed the extensive use of Egyptian blue and evidences the presence of these pigments even on areas not anymore visible to the naked eye. Here is the PIL image. Here I would like to show you an examination of this character, which is on the left side of the vent, with a mantle, with a chlamyd that does not show any distinct polychromy visible light, but which has been revealed by VIL and UVL investigation. In fact, the mantle show a coloration that is given by the mixture or the superimposition of Egyptian blue and red lake, since from multiband imaging it's possible to observe the Egyptian blue glowing white here. I don't know if it's here. And the pinkish emission related to the red lake. This detail was then confirmed by the observation of the high magnification images, which confirmed the observation of, which confirmed the co-presence of the two pigments and help us to select the most suitable spots for the point analysis to confirm the chemical composition of the two pigments. The colorful palette identified on this urn from the analysis include hematite-rich red ochre, goethite-rich yellow ochre, identified by the diagnostic iron crystal field transition in the reflectance spectra, and the presence of a black pigment, probably a carbon black, just because we didn't find any key elements related to different black pigments. These latter pigments, so the carbon black, was extensively used for the inscription and for the eyes, the birds, and the hair. However, the aspect of the black texture and the microscopic observation suggested that this pigment may be a later addition, but unfortunately, this could not be confirmed from an analytical point of view. On the other hand, on the inscription, the examinations confirm the coexistence of different pictorial layers. In fact, here, a vermilion base layer was found lying underneath the black one. In this case, this is probably linked to a change of the tomb designation, as was common practice in this period. To document the artworks and to support the scientific investigation, we finally acquired create 3D model by using the photogrammetric techniques. The models were used as support for the multi-resolution visualization of the multi-band images and for the documentation of the areas analyzed by spot analysis. At a later stage, with the support of the digital model, a critical interpretation of the remaining polychromy of the artworks can be carried out, and maybe hypothetical reconstruction of the original polychromy can be also developed or suggested. So I have now come to the end of this presentation, which describes the results obtained on the 2 Etruscan horns from Sarteano, and which demonstrate how the multi-analytical and multi-technical approach, but above all, the non-invasive protocol, allows a almost complete characterization of the pictorial palette, which reveal the presence of Egyptian blue, Madder Lake, red and yellow ochre, and carbon black. Of course, further in-depth studies are needed to answer all the questions regarding the characterization of the binders, for example, used, or on the stratigraphic sequence in order to reconstruct the exact pictorial technique. But this is, as we know, a slightly more invasive approach than that one that we applied for this research. So to conclude, I would like to thank my colleague Claudia Noferi, who presented this paper with me, and the other colleagues who helped in the acquisition and during the operational phases, and in particular the director of Santa Maria della Scala Museum, who allow us to conduct the research. Finally, I would like to thank you for your kind attention, and if you have any questions, please contact me by email or later in the discussion. Many thanks.
Thank you, Donata. You remain perfectly in your time. I appreciate very much. I appreciate the work of your group, and I'm sure that we will have several questions for developing the results, the discussion about the results of so interesting pieces with so a good conservation of the polychromy. Now we have to give the yes, there is Diana is ready to present the second paper. I don't see her.
Hi, you hear me?
Oh, very
Yeah.
well. Diana Scirri studied at the University of Bologna, and now she is a restorer of cultural heritage, specialized in ceramics, metal and glass restoration. And she will present her paper about the study of ancient architectural terracotta of the Republican sanctuary of Monte Rinaldo. Please, Diana.
Thank you. Do you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Good morning. The project that I'm going to present is about the restoration of architectural elements of made of painted terracotta and coming from the sanctuary of Monte Rinaldo. The project was born as a combined bachelor and master thesis in conservation and restoration of cultural heritage, and addresses several topics. We have 5 thematic areas: historical archaeological investigation, diagnostic analysis, restoration, and experimental reproduction. The sanctuary, located in Italy, Marche region, near Ancona, was at its height between the 2nd and the 1st century BC. It consists on a main temple, a rectangular cellum called Building C, a porch and the structure still being excavated on the west side. The main temple is attributed to Jupiter due to the discovery of panel with the bundle of winged lightning and ex voto with the name of the god. The building C is attributed to Hercules, thanks to antefix with resting Hercules and another with the lion proton. The confirm of this hypothesis, in confirm of this hypothesis, there are also two fragments of the pedimental decoration with the face of an adult and bearded man, maybe Jupiter, and a young man wearing a lion skin, probably Hercules. After the Samnite Wars, began the Romanization process of the Adriatic coast. In this period, a large number of Latin colonies were founded, and Latin language and Roman cults were adopted in this area. And this archaeological site is a typical example of this process. The first phase of the occupation of the site dates back to around the 3rd century BC, but the construction of the temple and the production of many of the architectural terracotta decoration has started in the 2nd century BC. After an unknown traumatic event around 150 BC, the buildings are being rebuilt, reusing in the foundation the damaged decoration of the first phase. The oriental portico and the rectangular sacellum are also built in this period. The sanctuary was then abandoned during the Augustan period, and in its place was built a Roman villa, reusing many terracotta panels. The site was discovered in 1958, and in the first phase, the latest structures were destroyed to recover the objects reused in them, and also to reach the oldest level considered of greater interest. Between 1965 and 1977, the site was restored using invasive technique and often wrong archaeological information, and also performing anastylosis of the portico, and this is a picture of the site in 2021. Thanks to the collaboration between the superintendents of Marche region, the municipality of Monterinaldo, and the University of Bologna, many new projects were launched in 2016, including the restoration of architectural decoration. We can split the architectural decoration into two categories: panels related to the coating of wooden structure, and sculpture related to the pediment of the temple. And this project is about the coating panels. The fragments of the sculptural group of the pediments are very incomplete and difficult to read because they were found embedded in the walls of the next phase. And we can assume that these were decoration of very high relief, full length and full size. Many characters were represented since several heads, feminine and masculine, have been found. The finishing and application of the color on these pieces is visibly different from the one that characterized the architectural coating. The ceramic body is compact and of a very light color. The preparatory layer is thin, and even the paint layer looks much more solid and shiny. Probably the surfaces of these products of greater artistic value were treated to protect them and perhaps even to enhance the colors. In order to confirm this idea, we hope to launch in the near future a diagnostic campaign, investigation campaign on these kind of objects. On the other hand, a large number of architectural elements have been found, allowing a greater reconstruction of decorative motifs. The study and documentation campaign of this material conducted by the University of Bologna has led to a new classification of various typologies called associating a letter indicative of the function to a number indicative of the kind of decoration. We recall in particular the position and function of some elements. Sime in the picture called A and B, which had the function of conveying rainwater. The antepagmenta in the picture called C, that protected the wooden structure of the temple. And the antefixes placed at the end of lateral tiles. The sanctuary has had two monumental phases and a change of the decorative apparatus, and that has created considerable difficulties in attributing the typology to the different buildings. Through the revision of the documentation and the study of materials, however, it was possible to carry on some hypotheses. And here you can see an hypothetical reconstruction of the decorative apparatus of the Tuscan temple. The 25 artifacts studied in this project came from this temple. 7 of them were only used for diagnostic analysis, 9 for cleaning tests, and 8 were completely restored. As already mentioned, the decorative themes from common design are very various, ranging from common design of Latin colonization, such as for inverted palmettes and birds with floral patterns, geometrical frames, and antefixes with Potniatheron. Potniatheron is the lady of the animals, a female figure represented with, on the side, 2 feline. A less common typology in this area is the winged lightning one. These coating elements are usually executed with a mold, with some exception. The preparatory layer has variable thickness, and the pigments are applied quickly and coarsely. There are bars on various elements. These technical elements indicate craft production of fair workmanship, but not comparable to the pedimental sculpture of which we have already spoken. Some elements deserve a closer look. Some antefixes with Potniatheron are characterized by the presence of shades and overlapping color, absent on the other pieces in which the pigments are distributed in uniform backgrounds that follow the relief of the elements. In one of them, there are numerous pictorial detail, and in the other one, there is light blue layer covered by a purple one. On arrival in the laboratory, the state of conservation of these elements was critical, and only some of them preserved some traces of the rich pictorial decoration that covered them. The alteration and degradation forms were attributable to 3 different phases of the life of the artifact: installation, burial, and previous restoration. Here I will briefly expose only the degradation of the pictorial film. There were black spots whose morphology and thickness suggest a biological origin related to the installation. Mortar residues present on the pieces reused inside the more recent walls. Soil deposit incoherent or extremely adhesive, and lime scale. In a preliminary phase of restoration project, diagnostic investigations were carried out to improve the knowledge of the material. Now I will expose only the analysis on the constituent materials and in particular on the paint layer, carried out with the aim to investigate the binder and the pigments. First was applied Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, a molecular qualitative and quantitative analysis technique used to identify varnishes, binders, and coating. Before taking samples, we observed and documented the paint layers with a digital microscope. Then 5 samples were taken in powder form and analyzed in transmission. No organic binder has been identified, but only calcium carbonate, gypsum, quartz, and silicates. 2 stratigraphic samples were then taken, incorporated in KBR and resin, and observed under optical microscope. On one of them, FTIR acquisition in ATR, or total attenuated reflection, have been carried out. The first point, related to the surface deposit, had traces of calcium carbonate and gypsum, probably related to the recrystallization of the calcite and the sulfation. The other points have only calcium carbonate. Comparing the result with the hypothesis of the pictorial techniques advanced before the analysis, we can see that it's not possible to completely exclude the tempera coloration, even if no organic binder had been found. The hypothesis of lime painting is supported by the constant presence of calcium carbonate, but the presence of a thin layer applied on top of a preparatory lime layer and the peculiar state of conservation supports the hypothesis of fresco application on a lime layer. Then, to identify the pigments, X-Raman technology was applied. It's a non-destructive investigation instrumentation that allows the acquisition of both Raman and XRF spectra. In this case, Raman was not possible due to the presence of non-planar supports. But the XRF spectra were enough to identify pigments, which were mostly natural earth, red ochre, green earth, yellow ochre, and due to the organic nature of black pigment, it was not possible to determine the composition of this. As for the blue pigments, the presence of copper ion as a chromophore ion made it possible to identify it both as azurite and as Egyptian blue. But due to the glass morphology of the surfaces, we have chosen to support the hypothesis of Egyptian blue. The most delicate operation in restoration of this kind of material is cleaning. So it was decided to carry out a large number of preliminary tests aimed to planning an effective intervention methodology. Cleaning was intended to remove only soil deposits, limestones deposit, and black spots. Many different techniques have been tested. Traditional physical and chemical cleaning using tampons and brushes, solvent gels, ion exchange resins, complexants, and of special interest were ultrasonic scaler that use the different absorption of ultrasonic radiation by different materials to remove the scale layer without affecting the painted surfaces. and the laser, which use the different in absorption of optical radiation to remove the deposits without coming into contact with the object and stress mechanically the painted surfaces. The first tests were carried on soil deposits on objects without chromatic residues. We found the most effective methods with traditional techniques, cleaning with brushes and water solution after a pre-consolidation. Then we carried on a test with the laser system with excellent results. So we decided to test the better techniques also on painted surfaces. And the application of the laser system again achieved the best results. Then tests for the removal of limestone's incrustation were carried on. Ionic exchange resin was too aggressive and damaged the paint layer. The application of laser system obtained always good results. And also the ultrasonic scaler in this situation was really good. Finally, we carried on tests on black spots using complexant with good results, and then with the laser system. In conclusion, here are the better techniques we identified to remove the various kinds of degradation from painted surfaces. The laser systems is suitable in all cases, but is not suitable in presence of dark pigments like black or brown, and particularly hard incrustation. After the test, some selected panels have been restored entirely. I will show you today only 3 artifacts whose restoration gave us very important information about the chromatic residuals. This potniatheron was covered by thick limestone incrustation, which covered the paint film. A first cleaning was carried on with laser system, and then the cleaning was completed with scalpel for the softest incrustation and ultrasonic scaler for the thickest one. The restoration highlighted a considerable amount of painted surface, allowing a new reading of this piece. In particular, you can see the brush stroke applied on feline to create shading and probably also the hair. And the white box on the dress of the woman, and pink shades on belly and the face of the feline, and also some details like mouth and eyes of the feline. As mentioned before, this is the only artifact on which we found these kind of details. These other objects had similar problems, and so also in this case we began with laser cleaning, and then we completed with
we have
scalpel.
finished the time. Please
Okay.
conclude.
Okay, and the restoration gave us this hypothesis of reconstruction of the color. And also for this other typology, we can hypothesize reconstruction. At the end of the project, we reproduce an element, a frame, chosen because of the simple shape and the color information. We realize the body, the clay. We fired the clay, and then we test the color application, lime application and fresco application. And this is the color application on the frame. with red, yellow, and black pigments mixed in water applied on lime layer, and blue and green pigments mixed with lime milk and applied on the lime layer. This is the final result, and this experiment confirm our previous hypothesis, and this reproduction can be exposed near the original one. Thank you for your attention and for the opportunity to join this meeting.
Thank you very much to you for this proposal describing the entire
Yes.
story from the production to the reproduction, restoration, and so on. Thank you very much. Now I see already Ombretta Tarquini, which is the next speaker, also on behalf of Elena Gabriella Lorenzetti, Lucilla Pronti, and Anna Candida Felici. Ombretta Tarquini works in the National Council for Research of Italy in the Institute of Crystallography and near Rome, and she will speak about the study of the polychromy of the Campana's panels, this quite famous series of a great number of bas-relief in terracotta for architectural protection of the walls. Please, you can begin.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
thank
you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for
Yes,
organizing. Thank you for organizing this interesting conference, which gives us the opportunity to present our work. I'll present a study of the polychromy of Campana's panels. Here, the architectural earthenwares, usually known as Campana slabs, include various types of clay-based reverbents produced between the late Republican age and the first half of the 2nd century AD. They were so called because the Marquis Campana, the collector and first publisher, gave them their name. It was the Marquis Campana whose change in fortune led to the dispersion of the collection among the largest museums in Europe. In his edition, the slabs are depicted graphically, sometimes in color, the window. The slabs in his collection were integrated and colored, so that the archaeologists often had doubts about their authenticity. We have Roden Winnefeld to thank for the first complete edition of the Campana slabs, a large catalogue with black and white photos. Much later, Siebert's edition of the Kessner Museum of Hanover in 2011 finally shows a complete collection in color. Today, the number of editions, especially on excavation, showing slabs with polychromy, has grown considerably. Why are the Campana slabs so important? Campana slabs are a serial product linked to brick manufacturing, which combines easy reproducibility with high-quality craftsmanship, whose mechanism of dissemination of molds or model still eludes. Its use represent an elitist phenomenon, essentially linked to the great aristocratic residence and the non-sacred spaces of sanctuaries, and turn out from earthenware decoration attested in central Italy during the 3rd and 2nd before Christ, combined with the Etruscan Italic decorative tradition. In some way, the context in which this expressed the highest level of modeling of craft and craftsmanship are always linked to the imperial family, or families closely linked to it, either directly or restructuring programs in which the imperial will occupy a prominent place. A peculiar figurative heritage is reflected in Campana slabs, largely inspired by Greek mythology, often linked in an iconological key with a meaning that alludes to the historical and political realities of the time. Other slabs have a narrative flavor and depicts aspects of Roman life, such as chariot races, hunts, theatrical scenes, nilotic landscapes, and they are found mainly in secondary contexts, such as tombs, thermal baths, rustic parts of villas. The decorative schemes show compositional principle typical of marble reliefs, Thoreutics, ceramic inspired by Neo-Attic classicism, but also by the Hellenistic style, and to a lesser extent by a traditional Italic characters. There are 5 types of terracotta among the Campana slabs, all of which were colored. In general, the crows and bases were added to the decorated slab, so we can have the same decoration on different types of earthenware. The raking cimas were modeled in one piece with the tile, often with a groove on the top for the coping, and provided with drip noses when attached to the eaves. The revetment slabs had a crown, usually in the form of a Ionic chyma, and a base in the form of a pattern of palm leaves and calyxes. These slabs were usually attached to a wooden structure with nails at the head of the beam or an architrave, with the primary function of protecting the wood. Less clear is the function of the crowing slabs, which were to be fixed to the wall with mortar and thanks to the listel at the base as a single relief in pairs in repeating series, forming a Ionic frieze at different heights of the wall, from the base to the wall to the top. None of these reliefs were ever found in situ. From the technical point of view, the slab is modeled, but as we can see observing the section, the tempers abundantly present in the matrix are never visible on the surface of the relief. We must therefore assume that a thin layer of dense and clean clay was first added to the mold immediately after the usual mixing with tempers. Starting from the technique of paint application, it has been proven by many studies the application of compounds of pigments, solvents, water, and organic binders, difficult to identify but probably had, on a surface often but not always prepared with lime wash, which improves pigment adhesion. This background, when abundant, is often the only trace that has survived. Here are 2 examples. In the first, the lime wash is visible under and around the blue of the background, the only surviving color. In the other, the blue background has completely disappeared, but the other colors have survived. The application probably follows an order of convenience. First, the light colors, then the dark ones, with little attention to respecting the edge, and lastly, the background, which could correct any error, as shown in the picture. The comparison is not identical, especially for the panoplia that just want to show the subject of the slabs. The palette used is that of architectural decoration, based on the primary colors of yellow, red, and blue, joined by orange, green, pink, and white. The fact that this palette is related to the 3-dimensional nature of the support of the tile or slab, and not to the motif depicted on it, can be seen in the transfer of the same to a 2-dimensional pictorial surface. The backgrounds of the paintings often become black or dark red. From this point of view, the slabs are much closer to the plaster, so that the 3-dimensionally is the distinguished element. In this case, too, the comparison is not identical. but the concept is appropriate. Due to the neo-Attic style of most of the slabs, we can imagine that they also followed the color rules of the sobriety of classical Attic architecture, especially the Parthenon. The choice of colors for the individual elements of the figuration is based, as far as possible, on a naturalistic principle, but above all, on the differentiation of the figures and the levels of the relief. For example, we can take a slab with Nike on the sides of a central element where the wings are of a different color, yellow and reddish-brown, as in the other slabs where the shields have a different color, to make them all visible and distinguishable. The comparison picture of the complete slabs are a different model on the same theme. There are two different crony slabs, both of which have a symmetrical decoration and must probably be displayed together. The first shows a Nike aside a central object that is missing. We can recognize the light pink of the skin, the white dress of the Nike, and the whites that have already seen in the previous slides. The other slabs shows the central object, a shield held by light pink arms. We have no bibliography for the skin. We have no elements that indicate the usually detailed coloring of the figures, eyes, eyebrows, lips, the silhouette of and thickness of the relief probably being sufficient to make the figure recognizable, as on the plasters or as seen on the pictorial surface with the same ornamental motifs. Examination of the available bibliography with color photos has so far revealed a detailed overpainting in only one case, namely in a small fragment of a slab from the Palatine Hill with a horse in strong relief, in which the bridle is highlighted with dark red color, probably red ochre. The slabs from the House of Augustus show the highest level of workmanship and paintings so far and can be considered exceptional. Together with a larger variety of colors, the eyes of the Gorgon are painted here. The edge of Hermes' cloak shows a red stripe, and the faces of the gods are rendered naturalistically. The usual state of preservation of the panels, in general, also does not allow us to assess the presence of nuance, which, for the same reasons as the physiognomic details, perhaps had no reason to exist. As far as we have been able to analyze, the backgrounds of the panels are usually blue and occasionally orange. The situation is different for the slabs with the Doric frieze. Here, the red background is typical of the metopes and follows the decorative canon of the metopes of the Parthenon. Here, we have listed all the methods we use for identifying the pigments that we found on Campana slabs. We have optical microscopy, X-ray fluorescence, X-ray powder diffraction, photon-induced luminescence imaging, fibers optic reflectance, and scanning electron microscopy with energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy. We examined the surface of the plates with an optical microscope and took photos with a professional Nikon camera. We have listed here some examples of pigment residues from which we were able to deduce how the pigment was applied. In the case of the blue pigments, here we report one case of the application directly on the surface, and in the other case on a preparation of milk or lime. Here, the application of medium directly on the surface and the chalky appearance. Another significant example is the yellow bow and arrows in the blue background, here in the bottom. Here we have attached two photos documenting how we carry out the X-ray fluorescence analysis. In the museum, directly on the slabs displayed in the glass case, we use a tripod to move the sensor head to the reside point, and in the laboratory on the fragments available to us. Here, a I show the instruments we use for X-ray fluorescence. And X-ray fluorescence is a technique that is very popular in the cultural heritage field because it's not invasive and we can perform the analysis directly on the surface of the object. We identify the elements present on the analyzed point and indirectly trace back to the pigment use. With all methods, there are advantages and disadvantages, but I fly over now and possibly we come back later to this. Here, we report the results of X-ray analysis. The results are in percent, and in red, we put the chromophore elements. So for orange, we have the lead. For blue, the chromophore is copper. For dark red, iron. And here, yellow, for the yellow is also iron. And for white, we find calcium, but also we find lead. Lead for the black-lead areas, because it's white lead, which has a turned dark gray due to the trace of hydrogen sulfide in the air. When it's oxidized, it turns into a brown lead oxidized. For X-ray powder diffraction, we need a small material sample, which we analyze with a diffractometer. This analysis can only be carried out in the laboratory. Diffraction is a molecular technique. It allows us to identify the crystalline phases in a polycrystalline sample. We were allowed to take the small amounts of pigment here in this photos under the microscope. We identified first here. First, we indicate the color of the sample: orange, blue, red, yellow, and gray. Then we put the crystalline phases found: minium for orange, cuprorivite for blue, and so on. And in capital letter, the respective pigments identified. Here, examples of photo-induced luminescence, and this is a imaging technique and was performed to determine the macro distribution of Egyptian blue, because UV radiation causes strong infrared luminescence in this pigment. We use a monochromatic camera and we illuminated the fragment with a monochromatic source, 360 nanometer, and recorded the infrared emission with a special optical filter. This technique makes it possible to detect small amounts of pigments that are invisible even to the eye. Here we report other further examples. Here, we report an example of fibers optic reflectance analysis of blue pigment with the appropriate processing to confirm the presence of Egyptian blue pigment. And here, an example of scanning electron microscope with ADS, and here top left we have optical images. Optical image, we can see the ceramic matrix. Here the layer of the color layer. Here in the right the backscattering electron image, and in bottom on the left the X-ray mapping of calcium, and on the right, X-ray mapping of copper. And finally, we have found by the virtual restoration of the images of palatine slabs that we were available to us, made by ourselves or found online. The first, we virtually restore the slab by inserting important elements of the signs, and then apply the colors based on the pigment traces left on the slabs or fragments of similar slabs. Where no traces of pigment can be seen on the slabs or fragments, we have not applied any color in our reconstruction. Here, the example of canephore on the size of Timiateiron. Here, another example of girl decorating a betilo. And finally, the virtual restorer of the tripod dispute between Apollo and Heracles. Here, the virtual restorer, and then the color applied. Sometimes we found variation the color used on the slabs with the same theme. One example is the found basin of the tripod. On the slabs exposed on Palatine Hill, the color is blue, and on the fragment and on the other fragments, it's red-orange. Also, we have found two ways of coloring the Ionic Kyma frame with ovoli. One is completely white, also brownish, but is a white lead. And another with white ovoli and orange and pink frame with a red pins. Thanks for your attention. I would like to thank my colleagues, especially Elena Lorenzetti, for the historical archaeological research for this work.
Thank you very much.
I finished. Ecco, I need to find, okay. I didn't find the button.
Thank you very much.
I finished.
We have more or less half an hour for the discussion. I think we can begin with the discussion of the first paper by Magrini and Noferi about the two alabaster urns of the Etruscan period. Is there any question in the chat? I check only. Yes, no, I don't see a question. Is there anybody who wants to ask something? May I begin with a question? Because I was interested, Donata, in when you said you have found traces of wax, and it is limited to some areas, was not in a uniform dispersion, so to say. So that you consider it as trace of an ancient layer of protection, or a modern, also not so modern, but modern age restoration.
Okay, thank you for the question. So the hypothesis of the wax is just based on the tone of the fluorescence emission. So we have this yellowish emission that it's usually linked to the presence of a wax. If we talk about an ancient restoration or a contemporary restoration, we cannot distinguish these two. We cannot perform a discrimination about an ancient or a modern materials. Even if with a sample we can analyze the more details, and so we have further information. But from an analytical point, a non-invasive analytical point of view, we cannot say more than an information that remains at the level of a hypothesis. Yeah,
yes,
and it's the same. And it's the same for the pigments. So in some case we have a clear identification by the non-invasive protocol. But for example, for the black pigment, we cannot be sure about the originality of these materials. So we need to perform more analysis and more in-depth investigation to solve and to answer to this question.
Yes, thank you. Because of course, you know better than me, but the traces of ancient works are very rare. I remember only a couple of cases on portraits and not on urns, but this is not important, of course. And yes, because there is, of course, the possibility of a sort of protection from a restorer in relatively modern times. Maybe also studying the position of this, because it's not dispersed on the entire surface. Also, this is quite interesting to understand. Localized, yes, maybe from this topological study,
Yes.
we could guess some ideas to verify, maybe with a thin section in the future.
Yes,
Thank you
and
very
we
much.
found it just on this urn, even if both are located in the same place. But on the other one, we have no this kind of emission, but we have just on the 731, so the second, and just on the faces of the character. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Interesting.
You're welcome.
There is a question for Ombretta Tarquini, but I would like to wait a moment. We can have a last question before for the first paper, if there is any more.
I have a question.
Please, Isabel.
Donata, you said something about a white ground layer.
Yeah.
Was it on both urns or just one? And did you get any results on the composition?
This white layer was on both, but in the first one, which was the urn with less trace of polychromy, we found it just in few areas, while on the other one, the richer one, is localized almost under all the paint. So, but we have no analytical answer to this point, because without sampling, we have no information. We tried with the FTIR, but here I didn't report the results because was unsuccessful, because we had a high signal coming from the gypsum, the calcium sulfate coming from the alabaster. So we can just do an hypothesis on the base of the literature, in which we found that in similar artifact, we found calcite, ground layer made with calcite. But we on different object, also coming from Etruscan environment, we found also lime-based, but is on stone, not alabaster. So this could be extremely interesting for us as well. Yes, in order, because it solves also the technique that was used to realize this object.
Of course,
yes,
that's right.
Maybe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donata. Thank you, Claudia. I think we could ask for questions about the second paper and about Monterovello, the terracottas, the architectural terracottas. Is there any question from the public? Everything is clear, crystal clear.
I think there's one on chat, Paolo.
Sorry, Jan.
There was one, I think there's a question on chat. to Ombretta.
Ombretta, yes, I would like to. I am going in order. So,
Okay, sorry.
If there is any question for Diana, I would like to have yes. Otherwise, we can of course shift to the third paper of Ombretta Tarquini. And there is a question: which software was used for virtual restoration of the panels?
I use Photoshop simply with working on the multiple layers. So and it was very easy to restore because the designs have a great symmetry. So I could use the part of the bottom figure to integrate each other. And I think I have another questions about the latter additions. I don't know if it's for me or for somebody else. I can answer by showing again my if it's necessary, I'll show my presentation. Under the microscope, we can see the different layer and on the surface of the panels. So it's maybe sometimes it's not easy to understand, but it was really easy to understand on which layer, also because there is the relief. So in sometimes there is I show a picture where there is the blue background and over the yellow ochre for the arch.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have a comment about the ground, because both in the second and in the third paper we have seen the colors of the ground, and maybe you know that there was a study by Leila Walter-Caridi, who opened these type of studies because she studied the ground of the in the Greek art in the earlier period, in the archaic period. There was a red, more or less, the red ground, and then from more or less Fidian, when there is the change between the also in the ceramics, in Greek ceramics, the change between black and red ground, there is a change, and the color is blue, or anyway dark. And I checked the situation also for later periods, and in the Etruscan period, in Roman times, until the early Christian period, there is a prevalence of blue ground, which is the classic ground. Is not, according to me, is not the sky, but is the ground of the color of the ground, because there are also the study about the color of the plaques, the support in the Roman statues, and they were painted in blue for giving the idea of they are on the ground. So in some cases there are light colors. Ombretta showed us a couple of examples, I think, with red. Correct, please, me if I'm wrong. So that I would like to know, if it's possible, something more, because my opinion is that the blue or dark ground is for representative for arte di rappresentanza, we can say in Italian. And the light ground is for narratives, because from the Hellenistic tradition. So I think there is this difference. Do you think it is possible to understand something from the samples you examined, Umbretta?
We have just report what we've seen, and my colleague has done the bibliographic documentation. So we need more example, more fragments, or more plates, campana plates, because sometimes there is a variation on the same theme. So if we don't have any more samples, I think we cannot affirm make the how do you say we cannot declare
this is the interpretation.
anything.
Okay, of course.
So,
Yes,
okay.
yes, I understand. Yes, because it is, according to my idea, is that the ground has a metalinguistic meaning. It means that this is a type of discourse or another, a narrative or
Yes.
a representation of aesthetics,
Yes.
aesthetic or narrative,
Excuse.
so to say. I hope to be clear enough. But,
Yes,
of
but
course, it is. We need more elements to
yes,
decide.
also because I'm a physicist, so
You know, I
report
understand.
what
I
I see.
understand, of course.
I cannot
I'm an archaeologist, so
So-
everybody has his own
point of
ideas
view, of course.
and targets, of course. Is there any other question on one of the three papers?
Also in the chat, answer
yes,
my
thank you.
colleague, and no meaning of the blue background. At the moment, we have just an example about orange background. We have just
Okay,
one
okay.
example of little fragments that I show in the presentation. So we need
Thank you, Elena.
fragments.
And there is one question for Donata. Good morning. Any gold on the urns? I see on others.
Yes, me too. I see on others of alabaster horns from the same period, but here we didn't find any trace of gold, any residual, or at least any residual. While on the other one, we have a richer decoration by golden foil. Yeah, but in this case, no.
Any other question? Comments, suggestions, criticisms?
Yes, I don't see any other questions. The other question was from Elena Lorenzetti. It was not from me about the gold, I must say. I was reading it. Okay.
Okay, maybe we can go to eat our lunch.
Yes. Okay, because there are no more questions, so we can finish this panel, and we will be back at 2 Lisbon time, don't forget. It's been
Thank you very much.
a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you
Thank
then.
you. Bye.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Thank you. See you later.